All right, friends. All right, Jazz fans. All right, you trade machine addicted weirdos. Should we do one more round of Who Says No? I think we should. We've been doing this video series here at Salt City Hoops, taking reader submitted trades, Jazz involved trades, and trying to suss out which team would say no in these scenarios. Would the Jazz say no? Would the other team involved say no? Or maybe are some of these close enough that there's a way to get them done? We've been guessing at that, and believe it or not, we have 7 that we haven't gotten to yet with 7 days before the trade deadline. It has the potential to be a wild NBA trade deadline across the league. It has a potential to be a little wild for the Jazz because they have picks and players and multiple directions they could go. So it's a fun time to speculate and guess and figure out kind of how we gauge the value of these different assets and these different things that could be thrown into trades from various sides. So we're going to look at these last 7 starting right now. All right, this first proposal comes to us from 45 for MVP. 45 for MVP is a great follow. I love interacting. 45 suggests that the Jazz get Jackson Hayes and Kira Lewis Jr. from the Pelicans in exchange for Kelly Olynyk. So, here's the thing about this one. Jackson Hayes has kind of been an edge of the rotation guy. He was a little bit more of a rotation regular last year. This year, he's kind of on the fringes. He has averaged 5 points per game when he does play. Plus, he's a restricted free agent this summer, so you've got to make decisions on him pretty soon. He's probably not really the prize in this trade. Former lottery pick. I'm sure there are people out there who like him. I'm just saying that from a production standpoint, he's probably not the prize. On the other hand, Kira Lewis Jr., a year and a half left on his rookie deal. He's been a fringe rotation guy in the past, but this year he's played just 74 total minutes thus far going into Thursday night's games. So I'm not sure exactly what here entices the Jazz beyond, maybe this is something, I didn't ask 45 this question, but maybe this is something that was proposed just with the mindset of, moving away from Kelly Olynyk, who has some guaranteed money next year, clearing the way for Walker Kessler, who's been phenomenal. And, there's that chance. I have said all along, I don't think the Jazz will trade their veterans just to trade them. I don't think that they're interested in making deals solely with the benefit of winning more games this season. But I also don't think they'll make trades just to lose more games this season. And if the counter argument is, well, how much is Kelly, look at the advanced metrics. Is Kelly Olynyk really helping the Jazz win that much? First of all, I would say, yeah, I think he unlocks a lot of things for the Jazz. But, even if you believe that Kelly Olynyk is a net neutral impact on the Jazz's win total, I still think there's something to be said for asset management here. Olynyk is a guy that a few months ago they got for Bojan Bogdanovic. And while I think the Jazz front office cares less about that kind of optics than most people think they do, or than most people want them to, maybe, I don't know that you want to be the team that in 6 months' time went from Bojan Bogdanovic to Hayes and Lewis. I just don't know that there's enough there for the Jazz. So I think on this one they would probably hold out and see if there was something better out there for Kelly Olynyk. All right, this next reader proposed trade comes from Clark Soldering, who suggests that the Jazz go get Danny Green, who, by the way, just played. He just finally debuted this season, along with Zaire Williams and a 23 Memphis first-round pick in exchange for Jordan Clarkson and Udoka Azubuike. So first of all, a little bit about the pick. Memphis would obviously want protection on that. I don't think you're going to get an unprotected pick for Jordan Clarkson at this point in time. Memphis, the Jazz might prefer a different year other than 23. They already own 3 picks in next year's draft, and I don't know that they're dying to try to figure out how to roster 4 first-round rookies in one season. Memphis does own their own pick and a lightly protected Golden State pick in 24, so they could trade a pick that year without it hampering their ability too much to make trades into the future. So that's just the pick, but let's zoom away from the pick and talk about the players here. Danny Green, without getting into Danny Green, because, Memphis reportedly is really interested in bringing what he can offer as, kind of the consummate 3-and-D guy and a guy who's been deep into the playoffs with different teams. So let's pretend that they're being earnest about that and that they really don't want to move Danny Green. Even taking him out of it, the Grizzlies would have to be okay giving up Zaire Williams, who, by the way, is a former top 10 pick in just his second year, right? He's starting to play a little bit more. He's had some double-digit games recently. I think, when you trade for a pick, part of the allure of a pick is the level of talent you're going to get, but also the amount of time that you're going to have control over someone's destiny. You're going to have some years where they're locked in at a lower salary than maybe their basketball value. So, in that regard, getting Zaire Williams, a recent top 10 pick, is kind of like getting another pick in this trade. So I'm not sure that the Jazz can get both Zaire and, a good or a decent first in this trade. I think this might be a little bit much for the Grizzlies. I think if the Jazz were okay getting one or the other, then maybe, but then you have to get into the Danny Green question and how serious they are about wanting Danny Green for their playoff run. Jordan Clarkson would make them smaller, and they're already a little bit small, right? They start Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, who's built like a tank, but he's shorter and doesn't have a great wingspan. And then they play Tyus Jones a lot of minutes off the bench, who's another diminutive guard. So I'm not sure Memphis would do this one. Maybe it's a little bit more palatable for them if, again, you adjust some things to where they're not giving up a recent top 10 project and a pick. But let's move on to our next one, which was another one that came from 45 for MVP. Halls RH on Twitter also proposed something similar. Halls RH didn't provide the details, 45 did, so we're gonna roll with that one. And this proposal is, again, involving Jordan Clarkson. This time Jordan Clarkson goes to Milwaukee. The Jazz bring back Grayson Allen, Marjan Beauchamp, and a 29 Milwaukee first. So again, kind of the same concept here. Now, granted, Marjan was not a top 10 pick. He was a later first-round pick. He's starting to play some minutes. He's been kind of at the edge of their rotation as well. He's a rookie, so whatever team owns his rights at the end of the year still has 6 or 7 more years of Marjan at pretty reasonable. 3 more years at a reasonable rookie contract. And then obviously the ability to control his rights with restricted free agency after that. So again, Milwaukee might be a little bit leery about giving up both of those things to get Jordan Clarkson. They're also reportedly really after Jay Crowder, but we'll see how that pans out. So that's just something to keep in mind here. Also, Giannis will be 34 in 2029. So that pick, and again, they would want some kind of protection on it, right? They're not going to give an unprotected pick for Jordan. So, is that pick kind of a bridge too far for a team that has, some real ambiguity that far into their future? Although, the other thing I'll say about this, fun wrinkle on this one, just to think about, I don't think the Jazz have any particular use to bring Grayson Allen back. I don't think that's something they're probably super interested in. But there are reports out there that the Knicks are interested in Grayson Allen. The Knicks have a lot of pieces that are interesting, sort of project guys, young guys, but probably aren't win-now pieces in the sense that Milwaukee is looking for. Milwaukee is trying to really make a push now to maximize Giannis's prime. So I do think that you could talk about some constructs, like which of those young guys would the Knicks maybe give up to get Grayson Allen that isn't good enough today for the Bucks, but might be interesting to the Jazz, right? I don't know. You're not getting Quentin Grimes, because if they weren't going to give Quentin Grimes for Donovan Mitchell, they're not going to give Quentin Grimes for Grayson Allen. But, could you get a Quickly? Could you get an Obi Toppin? Would Marjan and Obi Toppin, for example, and let's take the pick out of it, would Marjan and Obi Toppin be enough for the Jazz to move on from Jordan Clarkson? I don't know. Maybe. So that's just kind of a wrinkle to consider, just riffing off of what 45 for MVP proposes. I think as constructed, I would guess that Milwaukee says no to this deal as built currently. All right, let's talk about some Clipper deals. And I will admit that the Clippers kind of confuse me. The Clippers have a lot of interchangeable parts. I was talking to Ken Clayton last night, and Ken can't stop looking at Clippers scenarios just because they can. There's so many different permutations they could do. They're supposedly really after a point guard. And you could argue that for them, getting a starting caliber point guard should be worth the last first-round pick that they can trade. They currently have 2 that are owed conditionally, so they can only trade 1 more. And once they trade 1 more, they have limited ways to get better after that, right? So trading that 2028 Clipper first, and in this scenario, Adam Bushman has that lightly protected. Again, you might have to protect that a little bit more to get that pick away from the Clippers. But even protected, I think the philosophical question for the Clippers is like, how much do you value Conley and a year and a half of Mike Conley in order to be able to give up that last pick? So the full proposal here from Adam is Rocco, Marcus Morris, and Amir Coffey, along with that pick with some kind of protection, to the Clippers for Mike Conley and Kelly Olynyk. I will say at this point, I think Rocco is basically just kind of bad salary. He's not playing as much. He's career lows across the board. He's not shooting well. His defense has taken a big step back, and yet he's still making that low 8-figure salary. Amir Coffey to me is kind of just like meh. He barely plays. He's kind of interesting because he's a big-bodied wing, but like I don't know that he's a huge high-level prospect either. Morris is actually pretty important to some of the Clippers playoff lineups. I think they'd have a hard time letting go of Morris because of what he unlocks for them in terms of some of their lineup optionality. And yet, I'm not sure that he particularly fits what the Jazz are looking for in terms of timeline and things like that. Maybe the Jazz would take him and see if they could flip him later for some minor asset. He's an expiring contract next season, so you're not going to get a ton. But that's kind of the value coming back in this deal. This one is really about the pick, and then maybe you can do something with Marcus Morris. Again, from the Clippers perspective, Kelly Olynyk would be helpful. He would be useful to them, especially if they're giving up Marcus Morris in that deal. But this is really about, a year and a half of Mike Conley, and they would have to feel like Mike Conley could still play at a really high level. On this one, frankly, I don't know exactly who I think would say no, which might mean that it's kind of sneaky close. Again, I think that if I'm them, I'm having a hard time putting that last pick in a deal for something that's really only going to pay off for about 110 more games, right? The rest of this season and then next season. But like I said, they're close enough to that title contender class that maybe they do it. From the Jazz perspective, I think getting a good pick far into the future, in 2028, who knows where Kawhi and Paul George are going to be. So I think getting that pick, depending on the protections, could be a useful way to leverage Conley and Olynyk. I will say a version I liked a little better of this came from JSJ Jazz Fan 78, who actually suggested putting Vando in this deal instead of Kelly Olynyk. And then the salary is less, so the Clippers actually have to send less salary back to the Jazz, so they could maybe hold on to Marcus Morris and put a smaller salary in the deal instead. And I actually think I like that a little bit more for both sides, frankly, because then the Jazz can still go out and see if there really is a market for Kelly Olynyk. There are a lot of teams that are rumored to be looking for that kind of center. So that's kind of how I feel about this one. This deal, I'm not sure I love it from either team's perspective. The variation we got from Josh, where it's Vando instead of Kelly Olynyk, maybe. But again, a lot of it is going to come down to, can the Jazz really get that pick that far out from the Clippers, and what would the protections be for them to consider it worth their while? Rye_N__ proposed another Clippers trade, and this one also has me a little bit flummoxed. It's another hard one to figure out. So here's the thing. The word from several national people is that the Clippers really don't want to trade Kennard and especially Mann, because those guys are both young and they're both cheap and they've both been, good off and on. And I get that, like, you have to give something up to get something in trades. And maybe the Jazz supplying a pick in this trade would help get it over the hump. But I think that's really the question here. So the proposal from Rye_N__ is Kennard, John Wall, and Terrence Mann to the Jazz in exchange for Conley. And it's the Jazz bringing the pick to the party, although that's not a very good pick there. That's a pick that currently is projected to be like 27-28. It's the least favorable of Brooklyn, Houston, and Philly. It'll probably be Brooklyn or Philly. So, the Jazz aren't doing this for John Wall. John Wall doesn't fit anything that the Jazz are doing. So would the Jazz do this for Luke Kennard and Terrence Mann? It's funny. I talked about this one with Mark Russell Pereira. He sort of has cooled on Luke Kennard. and just feels like Kennard isn't the guy that you would necessarily start spending assets on if you're the Jazz at this phase of the rebuild. And that's a fair point. Kennard was a 16-point per game scorer in Detroit. He's cooled since then. He doesn't play as often, and it's hard to know if that's because he's injury prone or if it's just because he plays for the LA load managers. Terrence Mann, I don't even know if the Jazz could get Terrence Mann in this deal, frankly. They might have to swap him out for, again, another small salary like Amir Coffey, like Brandon Boston Jr. Luke Kennard is locked in on a pretty cheap deal. He's a heck of a three-point shooter. He's on pace to lead the league in three-point shooting among qualified shooters for the second straight season. He's not particularly big, but heck of a shooter, probably a minus to neutral defender. But I think, look, in terms of managing an asset, if you can turn Mike into a guy that's under contract for a few more years, I don't think that's going to become a negative value contract just because of the way the salary cap is moving. I think if I don't love this one from either team, which again might be a sign that it's actually pretty close, but I think if there's a team that hesitates a little bit more here, it is probably the Clippers. So yeah, I think trying to get both Luke Kennard and Terrence Mann in this deal is a little bit choosy. There might be to Ken's point, like the Clippers have so many kind of interchangeable parts that there's probably a deal you could work out here. Liquify is trying to get the Jazz OG Anunoby. It's tough to know what the truth is with OG Anunoby. There are rumors out there that it's going to take a Donovan Mitchell level haul to get him. There was a rumor for a while that it was like 3+ first rounders to get OG. I don't know if that's as true anymore because now there are reports that he's kind of unhappy there. Liquify says, hey, why don't the Jazz just go for it? Try to get him for Colin Sexton, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and, quote, a pick or two. Now, Liquify didn't give me details on what the picks were, when the picks were, how protected the picks were, and it's kind of hard to evaluate this without that piece. I think it will probably wind up taking more than this to get OG, just from a standpoint of like every team in the league would like a 17-point per game scorer who's also like a really, really good defender. Even if this was enough for Toronto, I'm not sure it's enough to beat 28 other offers. I don't think the Jazz particularly want to trade Colin Sexton. Nickeil Alexander-Walker in this deal is probably close to neutral value. He's there to make the numbers work. So I do think it comes down a little bit to what the picks are in this deal. As constructed, I would say Toronto can probably do better than this for OG. If not, this is one the Jazz might consider, as much as they like Colin Sexton. And believe me when I tell you that the Jazz got Colin Sexton not to just be a piece that they flipped 6 months down the road. The Jazz got Colin Sexton because they're interested in what they can turn him into. But I think if there's a chance to get OG this cheaply, the Jazz would say yes. I'm just not sure that the Raptors would. All right, Stephen J. Phelps has one for us to talk about. And again, this one is probably mostly a thought exercise, partially because you see how I have those 4 first-round Sacramento picks highlighted in red. Those are red because the Kings can't actually even do this. The Kings already owe a first-round pick, a conditional first-round pick. So the most they can actually trade at this point is 2 firsts. But I think what Stephen J. Phelps was trying to accomplish here is just to get me to think about, like, okay, at what point do the Jazz have to think about it with Lauri Markkanen, right? There was a trade submitted in the first of these videos that we did that I kind of used as a springboard to talk about Lauri and to talk about how the Jazz are really excited about him and there's no desire to move him. He's now been named an All-Star in his first Jazz season. Awesome for Markkanen. And so I think Stephen J. Phelps was basically here trying to say, like, bet. Like, let's see if I can make Dan flinch and move off of that position. So what Stephen J. Phelps proposes the Jazz get here is Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, a good player having a great season, Keegan Murray, a recent lottery pick, and 4 first-round picks. Again, asterisk on the picks, but let's just treat this like a thought exercise and just get wacky and mess with it here for a minute. So in exchange for Markkanen and Beasley. Now, like, to evaluate this package here for a second, 4 picks is a lot, right? 4 picks is more than the Hawks got for DeJounte Murray, a one-time All-Star. It's more than the Jazz got for Donovan Mitchell, although again, they got Lauri Markkanen in that trade, who they really believe in. It's close to what the Jazz got for Rudy Gobert. 4 picks is a lot. 4 picks for Lauri Markkanen would be a pretty amazing haul. Keegan Murray is a recent lottery pick, so that's, in his first season, he's playing well. He's a heck of a shooter. He's still learning the NBA game, but there are signs there. So that's kind of like getting a 5th pick, just because, again, you're getting that guy early enough in his career that you have that optionality. You can determine a little bit his destiny. Herter is probably worth a pick on his own. Remember, he was traded for a first-round pick last summer, and since then, he's gotten better. He's having an amazing season. And even Harrison Barnes, let's not get crazy. Harrison Barnes probably could have gotten the Kings a first last deadline. Now he's an expiring contract, so yeah, not a guy that is worth a first today, but I'm just saying, he's good. He has some value on his own. So really, if you look at it through that lens, this is kind of the equivalent of 6 things that are roughly worth first-round picks in exchange for Lowry and Beasley. So is that a ridiculous price? I mean, I think the Kings would probably think about it if they had 4 first-round picks they could give, because, to get an all-star talent in this league, you have to give up a minimum of 3-4 picks and some young players. That's just the price to get an all-star in the NBA trade market. Beasley would add some extra value on their side. So I don't actually think that this is crazy for the Kings. And to answer Steven's thought exercise here, I actually don't think the Jazz would say yes to this either. And I'm not trying to be ridiculous, Steven. I do know that, we're not talking about Giannis or Luka Doncic here. There is somewhere in the theoretical realm, there is a number of picks, a number of assets that would make the Jazz go, oh, crap, we really got to talk about accepting this deal, don't we? I don't think this is it. I don't think the Jazz are going to turn around and deal Markkanen for picks when he's a player who they would have spent picks to go get if they could have. That, right? That's the reason why the Cavs return was the offer they ultimately accepted, even though it was fewer picks than a New York could have offered, right? It's because they viewed Lowry as being the type of prospect, and this was before his all-star leap. They viewed him, even last summer, as being the type of prospect that was worth taking, 3 firsts instead of 5, or whatever New York was offering, or whatever Orlando was offering, or whoever else was in the mix, right? So I get it, Steven. You made it interesting. You made it tempting. You made me stop and think about it for a minute. I still don't think the Jazz are interested in when you're rebuilding, the whole point of what you're doing is you're trying to collect assets that have a chance of yielding a star level player. The Jazz just kind of not stumbled. They knew what they wanted Lowry to be, but they lucked into an all-star in year 1 of that experiment, year 1 of that rebuild. And I think when that happens, that's manna falling from the sky. I think you say, thank heaven, and you move on with what you've got. So I think the Jazz are hanging on to Lauri Markkanen unless some team just does something truly weird and offers a Giannis or Luka level haul. I really think that something close to that is what it would take right now. So this has been fun. We've done 3 installments of this now. I don't think we'll do any more in the 7 days that remain before the trade deadline. Maybe we will if we get more proposals, but I think more likely we'll think about some other ways to prepare you for next week's NBA trade deadline, with some videos, some articles. I've been talking to Ken. I've been talking to Mark Russell Pereira. We have some other ideas. So I'm sure we'll chat again before the NBA trade deadline. But for now, thanks for watching. This has been Who Says No here at SaltCityHoops.com. I appreciate you joining us and sharing your fake trade ideas so we could have fun slicing and dicing them in this 3-part video series. Thanks so much. Have a good one.